Welcome to the Get Over Yourself podcast. This is author and athlete Brad Kearns discovering ways to be healthy, fit, and happy in hectic, high-stress modern life. So let's slow down and take a deep breath, take a cold plunge, and expertly balance that competitive intensity with an appreciation of the journey. That's the theme of the show. Here we go. The Get Over Yourself podcast is brought to you by Almost Heaven, beautiful compact home use sauna kits, ancestral supplements, grass-fed organ meats in a capsule, DNA Fit, genetic testing for custom diet and exercise recommendations, Integro Health, high-potency liquid probiotic called Flourish, Organifi, organic powdered superfoods, delicious green, gold, and red powders, Wild Idea Buffalo, sustainable, grass-fed, beyond organic, and check out the bradkearns.com/shop page. That's my personal selection of favorite products for health, fitness, and peak performance. And here we go with the show.
You can have a hard drive that has a glitch, but if you have a really good operating system, you'll never know it. And vice versa, you can have a beautifully perfect hard drive, but if you have a terrible operating system, you're not going to get anywhere with that computer. If you assume cancer is a death sentence, the way we do, you're going to overdiagnose and overtreat it, and that has a ton of toxicity. And secondly, when you do diagnose cancer, well, what if you're treating it all wrong so that you end up, mostly harming people out of the process of your cancer treatments? The average person, 30 to 40% of their daily calories is coming from what I have to call non-food source, kind of fat, which are the vegetable oils. And those things promote cancer.
People, I've discovered an awesome new workout program that gets you results in 8 minutes. Yes, an 8-minute workout. And don't laugh, because the science supports the assertion that a properly conducted high-intensity workout lasting only 8 minutes with less than a minute of explosive sprinting effort can deliver more benefits and less downside risk than a pattern of much longer, more depleting cardiovascular workouts. It happens with Carol. That stands for Cardiovascular Optimized Logic, an artificial intelligence-powered interactive exercise bicycle that learns to apply the exact resistance you need to get fitter over time. Basically, the template workout is you warm up, hit an all-out 20-second sprint, recover for a few minutes, blast another 20-second sprint, and cool down. The guy on the Carol Fit AI website is wearing a suit and tie because the workout's too short to sweat. Yes, it's hip and slick and high-tech, but it's also legit. The sprinting elicits a cascade of hormones into the bloodstream that prompt fitness breakthroughs and turbocharge fat metabolism around the clock. I tracked these guys down and got involved because the protocol aligns beautifully with my fondness for micro-workouts and minimizing cellular damage by limiting your sprints to only 20 seconds. The Carol Fit AI website explains everything with simple graphics and videos, and you will get drawn in because it's time to reject the no pain, no gain mentality and conduct workouts that are safe, effective, and give you the most return on investment. Much less time than you think to get awesome results. CarolFitAI.com. Oh boy, what a treat to introduce one of my favorite people in the ancestral health movement, one of the leading experts who I look to for all kinds of things, especially when she turns on her bullshit meter and sorts through what's hype and what's legit. Her name is Dr. Cate Shanahan, one of the true catalysts of the ancestral health movement when she wrote her book, Deep Nutrition, back now over a decade ago. She and her husband, co-author Luke Shanahan, repackaged, expanded, revised it, and republished it in recent years. So it's an absolute masterpiece of maybe 600 pages of a deep discussion about the ancestral eating patterns that can help us regain our health, especially the 4 pillars of human nutrition: fresh foods, fermented foods, meat on the bone, and organ meats. And when I first got into Cate's book and talked to her in depth several years ago, I was blown away because I had the realization that I thought I was Mr. Super Healthy Eating Guy in my completely primal aligned dietary patterns. No grains, no sugars, no bad oils, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. And I realized that I was almost entirely deficient on 3 of the 4 pillars of human nutrition based on ancestral research per Dr. Cate Shanahan. So I had to up my game with the fermented foods, the kombucha, the yogurt, the sauerkraut, all that stuff in that category. And then also finding cuts of meat on the bone so I could get the collagen, the gelatinous material that comes when you're eating food near the bone, the gristle, as they say. And then finally, upping my game with organ meats, which I've made a huge effort to in recent years, I think to my great benefit. Also thanks to Brian Liver King Johnson for the inspiration and taking the ancestral supplements when my diet falls a little bit short. So this subject, we're focusing in on the kind of interesting topic about how to become cancer-proof. How about that? Would you raise your hand if you're interested? Yeah, I wouldn't mind becoming cancer-proof. And this is a hard-hitting show, so strap on your seatbelt, because if you want to be kind and gentle and respectful to the great pillars of human health information in modern times, the AMA, the federal government, Dr. Cate is going to come out swinging and challenging many of the conventional notions we have about cancer treatment. One of my favorite moments in the discussion was when I asked her straight up, well, Cate, what if you had cancer? What would you do? And she goes, well, I'd probably I'd probably watch it grow for a while and see what happens. Maybe head over to Turkey for some experimental treatments. Yeah, this show is wild times. And Dr. Cate references the great work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried, with the conclusion coming out of it that cancer is actually a metabolic disease rather than a genetic disease. This implies that instead of aggressive chemotherapy and radiation to attack cancer at the genetic level, dietary modification could be the most effective strategy. And we talk about the Warburg effect. So if you're falling behind during the commentary in the show, you can go look up the Warburg effect, which was discovered many years ago by a scientist suggesting or observing that cancer cells feed preferentially on glucose. They consume glucose at a greater rate than regular cells. So the idea is that if you get cancer, you can starve those cancer cells of glucose by engaging in a ketogenic diet, aggressive fasting, this whole thing of taking your diet and turning it into a weapon rather than heading to the hospital, getting your invasive chemo and radiation treatments, and then having the orange sherbet on your plate for dessert after your busy day fighting cancer. Yeah, it's disgraceful what they feed people in the hospital. All are the things on the sideline for a moment. So I think you're going to enjoy this show where I traveled to Cate's home, her new home in Florida, and sit down for an in-depth discussion. Fantastic, life-changing. Here we go, Dr. Cate, and learn more at drcate.com, drcate.com. Dr. Cate Shanahan.
Mr. Brad Kearns.
Those of us watching on YouTube, I could say, nice shirt. So
well, thank you.
Check us out on YouTube. Yellow. Also, the background is spectacular in this video, and is your new home of Florida. So once again, we get to talk about geography. You've seen the best of the country.
I have. I feel pretty lucky.
What do you think of Central Florida here?
Well, I was surprised that when I came down to Orlando the first time that they have these beautiful live oak trees. They're just like stunning trees. And so I love trees. And that was the thing that enabled me to take the leap from where I was in Connecticut, which I kind of moved there for the trees as well. So
right, we're thinking palm trees 100% in Florida, but here in Central, these magnificent trees with the growths hanging down. It's like the movie set.
Spanish moss.
Those are called live oak.
The trees, with a huge canopy, the draping canopies. Those are live oak trees. Yeah. They have them in California too. They're the beautiful picturesque oak trees, like when you think of Napa Valley and all that kind of stuff. But we have them decorated with the Spanish moss.
Oh, decorated. I see. You have the tree decorator comes and like throws it up there and dangles it down.
The Spanish moss fairies, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Also, what's cool is you're on this beautiful lake, and we're
basically in the middle of the state, but I was told by boating experts yesterday that you could, if you wanted, get all the way to the ocean. So we tried. We went for a few lakes and saw the whole thing with the little connecting pathways through the jungle, and fantastic.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The canals, they call them. And so there's just like so many birds you can see, and even little baby alligators.
Oh, yeah.
And all different kinds of trees. So it's lovely. I had no idea it was so nice down here.
So do you want to tell about your top secret job? Because it is interesting what you're doing and what the most progressive companies in the country are doing now.
So I came down here to Florida. I never in my wildest dreams imagined I would live in Florida. And because I was kind of happy, like up where there's 4 seasons. But one day out of the blue, a gentleman named Charlie Bales gave me a call and said, "Hey, your book, Deep Nutrition, it's pretty good. Can you come and consult for my company?"
Just a fanboy called you up one day? That's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
But he owned his own company, and he was starting to get into the health insurance angle, like in the human resources department, and starting to get into like the expenses and how to control the health insurance cost. And he had implemented the principles of nutrition in Deep Nutrition, along with, other things that he'd come across, and sort of like having the typical journey people go on from believing, like athletes go on, because he was an athlete, from, the low fat kind of way of thinking, and flipping that into, wait, no, that was all wrong. Let's think of a more holistic way of thinking about nutrition. And so he kind of went on that journey, after reading Deep Nutrition, and there was a radical change in not only his health, but most important to him was, his daughter. Like, she had such severe asthma attacks that they were constantly rushing to the emergency room. They actually built a house near to the hospital so that they wouldn't have to get stuck in Orlando's pretty awful traffic, whenever she was having an asthma attack. But since making the changes, that she's not really had that, like not at all, or like 1/zillionth of whatever the rate of problems. And so he was so convinced that it could actually really help reduce costs in his company, that he just kind of cold called and said, what do you think you could do for me? And I was like, oh yeah, I could show you guys all kinds of, I could teach you, or I could teach your employees, but I'm not really allowed, actually, in my current job to do that kind of outside consulting without getting permission, and on and on. And so he kept relentlessly calling to try to figure out a way to make it work. And ultimately he said, well, what if I just hire you? And without skipping a beat, I was like, yeah, heck yeah. Because it kind of is like the opportunity of a lifetime for a doctor like myself, because when I was working in the corporate hospital system, my goal of making people healthy was not in alignment with the hospital's goal, which was taking money out of sick people. Or, making sure people would get enough tests done so that the hospital system could kind of extract money from people, whether they were healthy or not. Doesn't matter. The hospital system has found a way to extract money from both groups. And I was tired of that. And that's kind of why I had moved all around the country, because I was naively thinking that there was some hospital system somewhere that would be different. But, I came to realize while I was in Connecticut that was not to ever come to pass. And so, when Charlie called and said, you could just work for my company,
keep people out of the hospital.
Yeah. Then, his company's interests are to keep people healthy. My interest is to keep people healthy. So there's an alignment there that I've never worked under before. And the experience is just it's transformative. It's like going, from an abusive relationship to a totally loving relationship. I mean, it's just like amazing. So I love this job. I love this company, ABC Fine Wines and Spirits, and they love their family and their employees, and they want to take care of them. That's why they hired me. And even doing so, there's still so many barriers in place by like the laws even that have made it a little slower going to get the program started. Like all kinds of ERISA laws and stuff around patient confidentiality and HIPAA and like regulatory stuff. You can't spend too much money on this or that. So many things in place to try to make it difficult for employers to really take control of the health care that they are paying for. Healthcare in this country is pretty much 50-50 funded by the government, in the military, Medicare, Medicaid, and companies. Private companies. And, there needs to be a revolution in the way that in the options that private companies have to be able to provide insurance for their employees. And that revolution is quietly like the way that the nutrition movement was kind of building back in 2002 and 2004, was just sort of starting. There's a few doctors that were kind of doing things different. A lot of little bloggers and podcasts were just starting to pop up. Well, I feel like the same thing is kind of happening in the health insurance world. I mean, no one ever thinks of health insurance as being exciting and having potential for a revolutionary change. But, now I do, now that I know how it works and how the system works. I think that, it could really save trillions of dollars
They're interested in that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We see the billboards in California from Kaiser Permanente, the biggest provider.
Yeah.
And it's all about thrive and be healthy. And they are talking about prevention and wellness and things like that. But I haven't really seen that touch point besides the billboard. I mean, they did donate to my kids' fitness charity years ago, so they supported a healthy community activity, and they're known to do that and sponsor the giant marathon run and things like that. So they're in the health and wellness game, unlike previous years where they were this giant building that you go to when you're sick.
Right.
But at the start, you said that, there was that misalignment. Mm-hmm. And I would say this is not a sinister, evil, premeditated, attempt to keep people sick. But when you make that comment, there are some things happening that are designed this way. So I wonder, can you expand on what's going on that this system is messed up and kind of pushing us in the wrong direction?
It all boils down to primary care and the role of the primary care doctor.
Hello, primary care doctors. Dr. Katie, Dr. Stephen. Okay.
So the poor primary care doctor who's really trained to take care of 80% of your problems.
Right. The gateway to the healthcare system.
The doctor who is supposed to be your advocate doesn't have time for any of that anymore. We get, 7 minutes to see you. And if you come in with, a problem, we can't solve it in 7 minutes. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to refer you. So instead of somebody who let's say they're an 80-year-old who's a little bit dizzy when they stand up, right? So they go to their primary care doctor and they mention that as part of the physical, maybe at the tail end, right? And at that tail end, the doctor's already running behind, looking at his watch. He's starting to get a little bit of palpitations himself because he's like, oh, I know I'm going to get docked on my RVU units, which is how they get paid if they don't keep up their numbers. So he's instead of sitting down with his sweet little old lady and saying, well, you're feeling dizzy when maybe when you stand up or maybe after a long day and you've been dehydrated, or do you have any chest pain, and asking a series of questions, just basically taking a history in the way that doctors are trained to diagnose just by listening, asking questions, that we don't need tests. 90% of it is supposed to be talking, and that's what I learned in medical school. But now, 90% of it is testing because we don't have time for the talking. So we refer to a cardiologist, and I'm actually talking about a real case, where this little old lady was referred to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist said, "Oh, palpitations. Oh, you know what? Well, I think, we better do a fancy version of an EKG called, a Holter monitor." And so the Holter monitor found a couple little funny little blips. And with that, the doctor said, "Well, you might need a pacemaker. I want you to get this other test where you have to be knocked unconscious so we can do some sophisticated testing of the electrical conductivity of your heart." Now that test is super expensive, and has some risks. You could have blood clots from it. You could have bleeding. You could have problems. You could go into arrhythmia. We might need to shock your heart. And she was kind of scared, so she went back to her primary doctor and said, "Do I really need that test?" Thank God this was in a situation where the second opinion, it was another primary care doctor that she went to that stopped the whole thing. And this is in a growing aspect of primary care called direct primary care, where it's almost like concierge, where the patients pay a subscription to have access to the doctor as many times as they need in a given month. And the doctor talked to them. You have half-hour appointments. And they just had a conversation about, well, okay, sure. So I know you have these little blips on your EKG, but are any of them symptomatic? And did you ever have any problems? And by the way, let's get back to that original dizziness you brought up, which was the reason you went to the cardiologist. And it turned out she was just a little dehydrated and she didn't need anything. And after talking with a primary care doctor who wasn't too busy to listen, she was fine. She didn't need any tests, no more drugs, no more risks, no pacemaker. She just needed to be reminded to drink a little more water or stand up more slowly.
So one solution could be somehow allocating more time with that first point of contact and having an educational experience with the primary care physician. That
is in existence already. It's just quiet. There's hardly any of it. And it requires really savvy doctors, business savvy doctors. And most of us are not. I can speak from personal experience. But it's the model, the system, the name of it, which you could Google if you're a listener and you want to find if there's a doctor like this near you, is called direct primary care. It's also known as concierge primary care, but it's not really like, super expensive. It's just like maybe you pay $150 a month and you pay that whether or not you go see the doctor. But on the months where you need the doctor, you will be able to go as many times as you need to get your problem sorted out and solved. Usually it takes a couple visits. It takes time. It may take some tests, but a good primary care doctor is very judicious about the tests that they order. They consider something called false positive rate and the risks and benefits of testing. And that is super important because false positives are potentially deadly and they waste a ton of money. And some folks have done some sophisticated analysis on what is the cost of all these false positives? And the estimates are somewhere in the billions.
And how are they potentially deadly?
Because let's say you took that little old lady and she did get the treatment, right? Let's say that she got, they found that there was a little focus of abnormal electricity that sometimes went off in her heart and they wanted to zap it out of existence, but they zapped a little too hard and, the vessel started bleeding and she bled out and died.
Right. And didn't need the test in the first place.
Right.
So she goes in that category of deadly false positive. Doug McGuff was writing in the Primal Prescription about the false positives from the mammogram screenings.
Yes.
And so they have a false cancer diagnosis that they eventually find out is incorrect. But the metabolic consequences, the hormonal consequences to the person who's been diagnosed with cancer, they were observed to last for 6 months. And they were identical to the person with cancer. So if you get told, hey, you got cancer, your stress hormone spike, your immune system is suppressed, you're wigged out, it's a crisis.
That makes total sense because
you don't have it, but you have the exact same profile. Yeah.
So maybe most of our toxicity of our experience with cancer is that, because we also know that cancer is often don't do anything bad. Like, so like part of, there's a doctor that maybe you want to have on your podcast. His name, last name is Welch. He's out of Dartmouth. And he's a super plain talking, super bright guy. And he's done all kinds of analysis on, overdiagnosis and, the assumption that early detection is better. He's tested that hypothesis and found it to be false. And he was inspired to do this by one of his own patients, where it was sort of a crotchety old guy from New Hampshire, live free or die state. You're not going to tell me what I'm going to do with my life. Yeah. So this gentleman was, like I don't know, probably a smoker, I think, that was diagnosed with kidney cancer and just didn't want to get even a biopsy. Possible kidney cancer, right? Yeah. On a CAT scan that was done for something else around his smoking, around his lung issue.
Let's just watch this grow for a while and see what happens.
And it didn't grow for 10 years. And he died of something else.
So they would have zapped that thing and put chemo into his body.
He would have lost a kidney, no doubt.
Right.
And he would have gone through all the torture of chemo, which we think cancer is a genetic disease. So we treat it with powerful, anti, cell division therapies, but there's a whole line of thinking that cancer is a metabolic disease. And so those treatments are just purely toxic. That's a book title by Dr. Thomas Seyfried, a genius dude out of somewhere in Boston. I forget what school, but there's a lot of, super bright people there, and he's one of the super brightest. So just like the idea that, first of all, if you assume cancer is a death sentence, the way we do, you're going to overdiagnose and overtreat it, and that has a ton of toxicity. And secondly, when you do diagnose cancer, well, what if you're treating it all wrong so that you end up, mostly harming people out of the process of your cancer treatments? So it starts to look like a really rigged system, and kind of the way I describe it.
Car repair shop where they're like, your manifold twist carbon turbine thing is loose and it's, I wouldn't let it go. You need to have an overhaul.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's my car. I'll do what you say.
Yeah. It's very much sleazy like that. But, I think of it almost like as a shark, like a shark is a machine designed to eat. And one of the things that it does is it swims and swims and looks for victims. Well, that's the advertisements that say, just get your physical, make sure we want to do this early detection. And the shark has these teeth that once you get in its mouth, the teeth point backwards. So if you're in that mouth, you can't get out. The teeth, everything is getting you into the belly of the shark. And that is what our healthcare system is. It's that shark that is drawing you into its belly so it can take you from your money, or take your money from you while talking about your health. And in some ways, also taking your health from you, tragically. Because if you believe anything about what I'm saying here, you take a person who may have a cancer that would never kill them, and you start treating them for it with highly toxic drugs that aren't really treating the right problem. Because what if cancer is a metabolic disease and we're treating it as a genetic disease? You end up getting an infection from the chemotherapy and you end up dying, instead of just never even knowing you had a cancer and having a healthy immune system that fights it off for you, which we know happens.
So this cancer is a metabolic disease instead of a genetic disease. Would this be kind of in that same belief pattern where we're thinking that the genes are our destiny rather than we control them at every moment with our behaviors, thoughts, exercise, food choices?
Yes, it's very much like that. It's also,
so it's like this fixed belief pattern.
Yeah.
That we now recognize cancer as a genetic disease in general in the Western medicine.
That's what we're taught.
Protocol.
That is the dogma that we are taught.
Right.
That there's no doubt, like what I learned is there's no doubt cancer is a genetic disease. If you have cancer, that's because in your cells, some gene went wrong and started dividing and dividing and dividing. And it was just like a mistake that your DNA made and your body couldn't get it under control. But we've found that cancer cells one person say who has like breast cancer, one breast cancer cell may have different mutations than a neighboring breast cancer cell. It may look very different. So if you know just that means so these two mutations just so happen to happen in neighboring cancer cells. Like, does that starts to make it like, how did that really happen? But if you think of it as a metabolic disease and you realize that we all have all these unhealthy metabolisms in ways that I, describe in my upcoming book, The Fat Burn Fix. But you don't have to be a doctor or read the book to know that people are overweight and there's a lot of diabetes and other chronic diseases. That is a metabolic problem, and that one of the consequences of all that, overeating the junk foods that we do, is we develop obesity, we develop diabetes, we develop autoimmune diseases, and we develop cancer. And it's a metabolic problem that can be reversed with metabolic treatments.
What 1 to 2 to 3% of cancers are genetic diseases, correct? That you're screwed and you're a little kid that got cancer eating healthy or whatever, right? There's some section of the puzzle, right?
Yes, so that's a really good point, because people have heard of like the gene for breast cancer, the BRCA1 gene and some other genes.
Or these non-lifestyle related cancers also I'm asking about.
Like what, for example?
I don't know. You tell me. Are there any?
Well, we think like the common thought of cancer is, that you have a genetic susceptibility, and there may be like lifestyle factors that, cause genetic mutation, and then that exacerbate that mutation to become, more severe and have more mutations until you finally develop such a mutated cell that it turns against the body and becomes cancer. That's kind of the standard way of thinking. But they're really, the genes aren't driving the situation and we know this because some, really cool experiments that were done a long time ago and that have been repeated, since, I'm talking about like the 40s, I think. There was a gentleman named Otto Warburg, who was a Nobel Prize winner, not for this research, but for other research he did because he was just a genius. He actually took, cancer, he experimented with cancer and took like nucleus of a cancer cell and put it in a healthy cell to see if that would turn into cancer. And most of the time it did not. And then he took the mitochondria of the cancer cell and put it in a healthy cell and see if that would turn into cancer. And most of the time it did. The mitochondria.
Is this the Warburg effect?
Yes.
That's the cancer cells feed preferentially off of glucose?
Yes, and glutamate.
So that's how we discover that it's a metabolic disease in the 40s, and we haven't, we forgot it or something?
Yes. We did much better research in the 30s and 40s on like true healing than we have done since.
Is that because you could mess with people more back then? Like the Cahill experiment starving.
Right.
I mean, the best keto experiment to date is the starvation experiments with Dr. Cahill in the 60s or something.
Yeah, right.
Now we can't do that anymore?
We could, because you don't have to starve people to get people into ketosis.
You could get volunteers.
You could just, well, yeah, that's true.
Right.
And you could
do another one. Do you want to do a starvation keto experiment?
You don't need to starve people. What you want to do is you want to study people who are fat adapted. Right. You don't
faster
need to,
study.
Exactly.
Right.
More of that.
Yeah.
So we don't need to do anything that's questionably ethical. So yeah. So to answer your question, no, it's because we were not conflicted, because our scientists and the people funding scientists, there was a thing called the physician scientist. Back in the day, doctors used to work 4 days in the clinic and 1 day in the lab. And that was
like the Google employees doing their great things. Many of the Google innovations came on that that 20% day they call it at Google, where the engineers are allowed free time.
Yeah.
Gmail came from a 20% day.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's the way medicine was. Like, the doctor was a scientist, and the doctors were brilliant. I mean, they were just brilliant, and they were able to figure out all this stuff, and they weren't conflicted. They didn't go into it with any preexisting notions, which happen in a powerful way when you're getting funding from somebody with an agenda. And almost all of our funding now comes with an agenda of some sort. Even from the NIH, the agenda might be, we want to get children to eat less saturated fat, because it's just assumed that having whole milk is bad for kids or something like that. So there's strings attached, and that drastically interferes with the scientific process because it biases our brain, and we can't see what's right in front of us.
Oh, so to pick up our conversation from dinner last night for the listener, if we got diagnosed with cancer today, what will we do? You and I, and anyone else who wants to hear from Dr. Cate.
Well,
what's the first thing you'd do, or tell me to do?
I would recommend, if you are a patient, is I would go over your diet and try and, figure out, is there something that you are doing wrong that you should stop doing wrong immediately and start doing better. And then in terms of like going through the standard chemotherapy and everything like that, that's an ethical conundrum. What's the word? Conundrum quagmire right now. Like
it's not seen as an ethical quagmire to anybody who got cancer.
It's like you assume that you got to go to get your chemotherapy. But, I would tell them to watch a few of the videos of Dr. Seyfried, before they do any drastic chemotherapy. I have a question mark in my head about whether surgery is beneficial, about whether radiation is beneficial. But I do know that dietary changes are beneficial. So,
they can't possibly hurt.
Right.
So honestly,
well, if you're doing a good diet, I mean, if I were to tell them, I want you to have more French fries and, Snickers bars.
No, a dietary intervention I guess we don't agree on what's healthy. I just did a podcast with Rip Esselstyn and Get Over Yourself podcast. So the vegan diet is seen as the ultimate. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say we're going to go the diet route, and you yourself would roll the dice on a diet intervention and sit back.
For my personal self. Yeah. Like, I would look and see, okay, well, let's say I wasn't already doing everything I could. I would definitely double down and be more serious. But I feel like right now where I'm at, I feel like I'm cancer proof. Because
the Dr. Cate Cancer Proof Show, that could be a book title.
I mean, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, the fat burn fix is going to make you cancer proof too, probably, because we just heard about the Warburg effect. Right. Cancer proof subtitle, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think we could do another book about, how burning fat helps you become cancer proof. But so I would just, and I have done this where I've worked with people to, if they're diabetic, they need to reverse their diabetes. They need to be able to get off their diabetes medications. They need to be able to become fat adapted. They need to cut down on their protein. They need to be in a weight loss state. I do everything that Thomas Seyfried recommends. Now he's taken it several steps further by, coming up with interventions that only doctors could do, and only could do in a monitored setting, give people in.
Stick some insulin. Well, Peter Attia did it in his backyard setting, and nearly lost his life apparently from sticking himself with insulin.
Well,
but that's a cancer protocol that we could explore.
Exactly, and it's being done. So
where, in someone's backyard? I mean, you can't.
In Turkey.
In Turkey. So what a show. That's why this is my favorite guest. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we're going keto, zero carb probably, with our cancer diagnosis. And then we're jumping on a plane to Turkey, Turkish Airways.
Yeah.
Don't they have those nice commercials and the nice sleeping quarters? Okay.
That's soothing. Yes. And hopefully you have a stress-free ride to Turkey.
Would the zero carb be a starting point necessarily?
I don't know about zero. So what you want to do is you want to get somebody like my philosophy is slightly different than the way they do it over there. They kind of dump people into it all at once. And I feel like you need to ease people into it personally. So if it were up to me, I would work with them first, ease them into it, and then hand them off to these other guys. And, once they become, a lot metabolically healthier, where they can handle a lot fewer carbs without having hypoglycemia symptoms and feeling, going through the low carb
Oh,
flow.
sure. I forgot that part.
Yeah.
We're fat adapted when we got our diagnosis. So now we're going to jump on board and go crazy. But if you're not, you can't just fast all day and fight your cancer.
I feel like that could be stressful. So I feel like let's avoid that too, and go through just a short period where you are becoming fat adapted. And, that may take a couple weeks, may take a couple months, depending on how, far you are down that road of diabetes. Which is a long road. But so the insulin therapy that they do is different than what Peter Attia did. So at least if I'm remembering, if we're talking about the same conversation. So what Peter Attia did is something called the euglycemic insulin clamp, where you're not just giving yourself insulin, you're also getting an infusion of glucose at the same time. Now, if he had skipped that infusion of glucose, I think he probably would have done a lot better, because what the infusion of glucose does is it shuts down the ketone and the infusion of insulin a little bit, and the amounts that he did, because you give so much insulin when you it's just a lot more insulin involved, I think, than what they do over in Turkey. And that amount of insulin shuts down your ketone production. And so you're working against the goal of ketone production. And that's why he almost died. But if you do it by a different protocol, you closely monitor people who are fat adapted. It makes total sense to me. You can drop your blood sugar levels down to, 10, 20 maybe, and you starve the cancer of one of its two fuels. There's a number of other fuels that cancers can use. And Dr. Seyfried has come up with another drug that helps to starve it of its other major fuel. But there's a lot of fuels cancer cells can use. So we can't even guarantee that will be a win, but it will definitely give you a leg up, 2 legs up, maybe 4 legs up. It gives dogs a lot of legs up because they do this more in animals. And
these smooth transitions by Dr. Cate. You'll have a leg up. You'll have 2 legs up. You'll have 4 legs up. And I'm literally true. Okay.
Yeah, because they've done this sort of thing in dogs because they can be more aggressive. And it's had just fairly miraculous results in dogs, with advanced cancers. Whew. Yeah, in this country.
You feel like you're cancer proof now before you need to go to Turkey. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Because I do believe that cancer is a metabolic disease, and I believe that
all cancer. Or is there anything we can separate out?
No.
A certain organ or this kind of cancer, that kind of cancer.
I don't think
they're all
so.
downstream from metabolism.
I'm not an expert, but my take on it is no. I think they are all downstream from metabolism.
So when I asked before about the genetic diseases, this would be things outside of the cancer realm, like Huntington's disease or, a misprint on your chromosomes, and then you get these terrible conditions that you had nothing to do with. Your lifestyle had nothing to do with. You were born with it or whatnot. Right.
So that every familial and genetic disease has something called penetrance, like a degree of penetrance, meaning if you have the gene for Huntington's, what is your chance of actually developing Huntington's? And maybe say it's something like 80%, but it's not 100%. I don't think there is one that's 100%. And that has to do with epigenetics and your metabolism and all these other things and the body as a system. It's not just genes. Your genes are not your destiny. And so in Deep Nutrition, our first book, Deep Nutrition, Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food, we talk about the epigenetic part of it, why your genes are not your destiny, and why your diet has such a powerful role in controlling your destiny. And, we don't use the word metabolism a whole ton as much as I do in my next book, Fat Burn Fix, where I help you meet your metabolism. We talk about metabolism, what it is and all this, and how, do you speed it up when you lose weight and all these kinds of questions. But in Deep Nutrition, I just explain a lot about how your genes need your diet to be full of the same nutrients that your ancestors got and their ancestors got, because they've been programmed by generations and generations to function best when they get this. It's kind of like the operating system of a hard drive, right? You need to have the food is like the operating system, and the hard drive is your genes. And you can have a hard drive that has a glitch, but if you have a really good operating system, you'll never know it. And vice versa, you can have a beautifully perfect hard drive, but if you have a terrible operating system, you're not going to get anywhere with that computer. And so that's the analogy there, is like you were born with your hardware and your diet is your operating system. And so you have so much ability to control the destiny of that hardware, that genetic hardware, by following a healthy diet. And in deep nutrition, we talk about, what is a healthy diet? Like we define it scientifically, but based on traditions. It's like, still to my knowledge, the only book that scientifically analyzes all world cuisine to see what they have in common. Like we go beyond just like, there's this book, The Blue Zones. We don't just look at 4 zones to see what they ate with a biased view and say it was all what we thought it was going into it, which is, mostly plants, a little bit of meat. But, we actually look at cuisines around the world, see what they have in common. And that's what's in the book, the 4 things, plus a lot of other stuff. But, so even if you have a gene for a disease, even if it's a gene for cancer, the gene for breast cancer, that BRCA1 with a 80% penetrance, which is a really, really scary number. I still believe that if you don't get your boobs lopped off and your ovaries taken out and you follow a really good diet, that you have way better than a 20% chance of survival. I've spoken with a couple patients who didn't even want to get the BRCA1 gene testing, even though they qualified to get it because they had the family members with it. They didn't want it because they intuitively knew what you said earlier, which is just that diagnosis of something scary, of a potential for cancer, could totally throw them off their game forever. And they didn't want to go there.
Wow, that's heavy. So I guess they're going to be obligated to get screened extremely frequently or something.
They have the option. Yes, if the gene comes up, they're obligated, not exactly obligated, but they're pressured to get the gene that, the screening for the gene, yeah. Right? And then once you get screening for the gene, and if it's positive, then you are heavily pressured to get screening for breast cancer with frequent MRIs and ultrasounds. Just
like anyone with family history, mm-hmm. They want you going in there all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So Seyfried thinks that maybe you shouldn't do this stuff, or let's say whether you decide to or not, and you get a positive on the image, then we're supposed to consider waiting a bit and just doing metabolic therapy out of the gate for a while before we hit with the hard invasive drugs.
I can't speak for him. I think that is what he has said.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
And
what you say. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other doctor, Welch. So if you put the 2 doctors together, this Dr. Welch says, maybe we shouldn't even be screening people so aggressively. Maybe we should screen them, but not so aggressively, right? Let's wait till the cancer is a little more advanced and like it shows signs that the body's having a hard time controlling this or something. Maybe we don't need to find it when it's, a millimeter. Maybe we can wait. Maybe we should focus on trying to figure out which cancers are aggressive and just focus on catching those. But we haven't done that. So we don't have that ability just yet. So if you take what he says, Welch, well, we shouldn't screen you so often. And then you take what, Seyfried says and says, well, once we find the cancer, we shouldn't even treat you with chemotherapy. You put the 2 together and you basically have a lot of people happy walking around wearing the yellow color that I'm wearing, holding hands and being shiny and happy and not worrying about cancer every single day of their life.
So, according to Biology of Belief, Bruce Lipton, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, Deepak Chopra, they're manifesting a longevity mindset and a health mindset. Mm-hmm. Maybe they are getting a dysregulated cell division and snuffing it out the next morning.
Absolutely. You put that in there too, and you can just cut healthcare costs, massively overnight.
However, most people are out there stuffing their face with shit. They should probably get in and get screened because they're going to bake cancers left and right, deliberately almost.
Yes. And the problem is there's so many people now in this diet I know better than you game. Like, I'm going to tell you what the diet is, what diet is the best diet. Oh, P.S. it's my weird diet. And, I say that if you just cut out gluten, well, that's all you need to do. Well, I say that if you cut out lectins, that's all you need to do. Well, I say that if you cut out vegetables, that's all you need to do. I say if you cut out meat, that's all you need to do. So, I mean, like, who do you listen to, right?
That was 4 different people to listen to
and
there.
That's just to start with. I mean,
you got to watch the YouTube video now, people. She rocked those 4 different personalities. She came to life in different positions of her seat. Right. So this is great. I mean, we're so confused. And then we go from one podcast to the next. In this example, the carnivore thing is hot right now. My microphone, the one that you're using, is smoldering hot from Rip Esselstyn going off on the Plant Strong, boilerplate. And people, whoever makes the most compelling case or whoever's nearest to you, it's a rough battle out there.
Yeah. And people are confused, and people even who are my patients are confused. And there's so many reasons to be confused because there's so much conflict of interest. And that's why our first book, Deep Nutrition, is so long and so involved, because we want to kind of start from the beginning of the conversation and see if we can carry you through the whole train ride until you come to a place where you're like, okay, that made sense. And now I'm empowered to understand whether other people's arguments make sense. But honest to God, you have to read the book like 3 or 4 times before you get there. And I apologize for that. I wish it could be more simple, but then the book would have to be even longer.
You got better shit to do. I know everyone's talking about Game of Thrones. I've never seen it before. It's on my list. I'm being pressured to see it, just like I'm being pressured to go get my colonoscopy when I'm 50. I turned that one down. I made a reasonable decision. Talked to Dr. Cate, had the pipeline, listened to what Doug McGuff had to say about the screening risk itself, just like the old lady, versus the benefit. Anyway, so go read Deep Nutrition. You tell me you don't have time? My goodness. Yeah. Fabulous stuff. But, we have a whole show on the 4 pillars, but I guess we should drop those in so we get a little bit of context. So this is the commonality among our ancestral experience, our ancestral diet. There's 4 categories of foods.
Yeah. They're fresh foods, fermented. That's number 1. And they're not in any particular order except for like the easiest, right? We all understand fresh. Fermented and sprouted. So we take fresh food and we we let nature alter it. So we either let the seeds sprout, partially germinate, or we let microbes interact with it and ferment it in some way. And then meat on the bone. So we use meat, but we also use the bone and the nutrients in joint material and nutrients in skin and the fat that's under the skin, and then organ meat. So we use all those spare parts that are right now mostly used as carpet backing and glue and dog and cat food. But people used to eat everything, and we used to get all of our nutrients from the entire animal's body, because all of the vitamins and minerals, if you eat the whole animal body and you eat a variety of different kinds of animals, you will get everything you need, and you don't need plants.
So among the most enthusiastic eaters on whatever side of the coin they fall on could very likely be batting 1 for 4, 2 for 4. The Plant Strong community is batting 1 or 2 out of 4 because they don't eat the meat.
Right.
An enthusiastic keto person who's going into the steaks not on the bone, not bothering with their kimchi because they don't like it, eschewing the fruits and vegetables or minimizing them extremely in the name of hitting this 50 gram of keto. They're batting 2 for 4 also.
Right.
Yeah. When I talked to you, I was like, I'm batting 2 for 4 here because I'm not eating the organ meats. I don't know how to cook liver. I'm afraid of it. It looks like a big dollar bill that got dirty. So that was a huge awakening for me. And then the fermented foods, you have to go make a concerted effort. And that's what's cool about the approach here is like, it seems like this radical diet today to go embark upon and look at a list. What's a sprouted food? Where do I get that? But this was all we had back then.
Right.
I mean, it was all about 4 for 4 for hundreds of thousands, millions of years, right?
Right. Whether or not you were in Alaska or Hawaii. Although a minute ago I did say you can do well and never touch a plant food. Everywhere people were, they did do that. So, I wouldn't necessarily encourage trying to do that. Even in Alaska, where there was like very, very little plant life, there still was some. There still were things like lichens, maybe there were probably mushrooms, and they also ate the contents of the intestinal tract of animals that were herbivores. So they ate all that part. I mean, they ate when I say the whole animal, I mean the whole animal, including the gut contents. I mean, we can't do that, right? So the carnivore diet today is basically, we're just taking the meat, right? We don't talk very much about all the other parts of the animal. We're just the muscle meat. I mean, we don't talk. Where can you even get lungs in America? Right?
Ancestralsupplements.com, I guess.
Yeah, there's your answer.
They bottle up these hard to find things. That's why it's pretty interesting. We can do a good job, but we got to awaken to the idea that our diet is grossly deficient, perhaps, even though we're super healthy, enthusiastic, in the top 1% of dietary awareness.
Right, exactly. It's just like we're taking a little sliver out of the rainbow of nutrient colors that we could be dipping into with the animals that we raise. Not to mention that we don't raise them very well. That's a whole other conversation, which we've had, I think, probably.
Well, I like to focus on this one as being cancer-proof. That's of great interest to humans.
Yeah.
And we've got some good tips. Just maybe we should wrap it up with we want to go to the 4 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
If we get cancer, we're going to go down and get highly fat adapted and let keto take hold. What are the hot points in the other areas of life? Like when you're consulting with your group there, are we looking at basic daily movement, sleep habits,
Yeah. So I do absolutely, encourage that kind of thing. But what I haven't mentioned yet, and is maybe the most important thing, is that the average person, 30% to 40% of their daily calories is coming from what I have to call non-food source kind of fat, which are the vegetable oils. And those things promote cancer. So when you're talking about going on a keto diet, you have to be careful about what kinds of salad dressing you get. Are you putting olive oil based salad dressing, or are you using soy oil? Because you're going to not be able to be like confident that you're cancer proof if you're still using the soy oil or the canola oil or the safflower and cottonseed oil, all these vegetable oils that I talk about at length in Deep Nutrition. You want to get the better quality mayonnaises, like the avocado oil based mayonnaises. And, you have to do that, or you are still actually eating foods that actively promote cancer, because those vegetable oils, they go after your mitochondria. They damage your mitochondria. There's studies that I cite in my next book that show that mitochondria cannot function when they have a certain concentration of vegetable oil that they're supposed to be trying to burn for energy. It shuts them down. They cannot produce energy. So, that's what leads to cancer in my view.
So why, when we go into Whole Foods, great, healthy store with their high standards on their website, we will allow no hydrogenated oils into the store. We stand strong against the horrible, but the canola oils everywhere on their salad bar and all their crap. And now I'm learning that some people are saying it's okay.
Canola oil?
Right.
Oh.
It's fine. It's a high omega-3. You can look on the articles going in detail why this is a heart-healthy oil, and you have the heart-healthy symbol. I found out that costs $600,000 to get the symbol on a product.
Right.
Heart-healthy.
Yeah.
That was you, right? You told me that.
Yeah.
$600,000 you pay, and there it is on there.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I have elderly family members, and there it is on the counter. It says heart healthy, and I made a comment about maybe considering switching over to something that wouldn't kill you. And there, it was an eye-opening exchange.
Right.
It says, but this is heart healthy.
Yeah.
Right there. That's why I use it. Ooh. But how can some people defend canola oil right now?
So I say you have to be able to visualize the problem. And the way I try to help people do that is by saying that like canola oil is unstable. It's molecularly unstable. And if you have too much of it in your diet, it destabilizes. And that destabilization is a problem, and it molecularly deteriorates. And this is where it becomes a little harder to visualize. What you have is something called free radical cascades, which is almost like radiation. It's almost like it becomes like plutonium in your body, where it degrades and it starts flying off these high energy molecules called free radicals that damage your cells. They damage your DNA. They damage your enzymes. They damage everything in your cell, and your cell cannot have a chance of functioning properly. And they shut down your cell's energy production. And so your cells have to learn to produce energy without mitochondria. They shut down your mitochondria. So the only way to produce energy without mitochondria is glucose. So you become more glucose dependent and more glucose dependent and more glucose dependent.
Because of the oils.
Because of these unstable oils that can't produce energy. So canola oil, even though it's omega-3 and not omega-6, is still a problem because it's unstable. And that's sort of a synopsis, but we're talking about advanced biochemistry that I went to college to learn to high school, learn the basic fundamental biochemistry. Then I went to college to learn more biochemistry. Then I went to Cornell to learn more biochemistry. And that's why I understand it. Now, it's hard to describe this advanced biochemistry in a way that means anything to very many people, but I try my darndest in Deep Nutrition. We have 2 whole chapters about the role of vegetable oil, first in causing heart disease, and second in causing brain disease. The second chapter talks about how it causes brain disease and genetic disease.
Look on YouTube too. We have a nice video with Luke, for 15 minutes hitting it hard.
Oh, good.
Why vegetable oils are so bad. The instability, just keeping it high surface here, it comes from the harsh processing methods.
It comes from...
So it's in the bottle unstable?
It is unstable in the bottle. It comes from the type of fatty acid. So the type of fatty, we have saturated fatty acids, the ones that we're told are bad for us. Those are extraordinarily stable. And what I mean is they resist reacting with oxygen.
Excuse me, could you speak into the microphone again? The saturated fats that we've been told our whole lives will kill us are
extraordinarily stable. But by which I mean they don't react with oxygen. We always have oxygen in our body.
Right, they're saturated.
They're saturated.
Which is an easy way to remember this for some of you out there that are coming from the athletic world or what have you. They're saturated. All the ions are saturated, so it's not going to become free radicals when it's exposed to heat, light, oxygen.
Exactly.
Okay, so saturated fats are okay.
Right.
Thank you. Enough.
And then
enough of the rest of that message, people out there. It's chemistry.
Yeah, it's chemistry. So
it's not marketing hype, it's chemistry.
Right.
Okay.
And then so we have monounsaturated like olive oil and avocado oil. Those are a little bit less stable. But it turns out that they're like the sweet spot, that they're actually the best for producing energy because they're slightly unstable. They can be broken down in a way. It makes the body, the mitochondria, it makes it easier to get energy from them because they're just a little bit easier to break down than saturated fat. But the body is not designed to get energy from these very unstable polyunsaturated fatty acids that break down accidentally without control, right? The mitochondria is a little machine inside our cells that's designed to harness the energy of oxygen and in a very tightly controlled way, get bond energy by using oxygen as an energy acceptor. And, what does that even mean? Well, what it means is we need to breathe because our mitochondria use oxygen to extract energy from the food we eat. And not all foods are designed to be optimally burned for fuel. The fats are one of the things that are designed optimally. And I mentioned earlier, the monounsaturated fats are the best at burning, they produce the most ATP per concentration of them that's available to our cells. Guess what type of fatty acid our bodies convert most of the sugar that we eat into when we eat too much sugar, say, and we convert the extra sugar into body fat? Guess what type they turn most of that into? Saturated or monounsaturated? We can't make polyunsaturated, so that's not even on the table. The answer is monounsaturated, as if designed to take carbohydrate energy and convert it into an ideal fuel. Guess what? That is designed. That is the design. And you look at any mammal, you look at any vertebrate. Well, I can say for sure in any mammal, that is what most of their body fat is stored as, monounsaturated fat. So whatever their diet is, they store most of their body fat as monounsaturated fat, whether they're an herbivore or a carnivore. Their body fat is regulating the ability of their cells to produce energy by putting most of it in the form of monounsaturated fat. And when we eat too much polyunsaturated fat, we lose that ideal ratio. We lose that ability to put most of our carbohydrate energy into the form of that ideal fuel.
So where does it go?
It becomes saturated, and that's harder to use. And
they're all stored in triglyceride form?
Yeah. Whether
it's mono or saturated.
Right.
Right. So we're getting dysfunctional fat metabolism from consuming these nasty oils.
Yes.
And if this is this was basic biochemistry lesson. Thanks for hanging in there, student. How can anyone tout the consumption of these oils today when we're talking about basic biochemistry?
Like morally, how can they do it? They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand the biochemistry, and they haven't looked into how that biochemistry affects the physiology of the body.
So what about the dead bodies? They don't looking at the...
They're finding other reasons. You can take a look at the same evidence, and if your idea is preconceived that it's because of the saturated fat, you're going to find ways to blame saturated fat.
Okay. There you go. We wrapped it all up. I mean, that makes sense, right? So we just kind of have to dig deeper, get longer books maybe.
Yeah. Think harder. I mean, if you really want to know the answer, it's cool to be able to listen to a podcast and get some ideas and hear some cool ideas. But you have to do more than that to really be confident that you've found the right answer. And a lot of people sort of try this and try that and get better. Those people are really good at listening to their bodies, stumble into it by trying this and trying that and trying what, I recommend and finding that did work best. But there's so many, it's so hard to do that. You really do have to be willing to understand what is your core value? What is your core belief? Do you believe that nature knows best? And do you believe that nature set it all up in a way that would work best for us? Or do you believe that nature put these little minefields out there for us in the form of gluten and lectin and plants that taste good, right? But that actually, will kill us, and we have no way of dealing with the sugar in fruit, right? You can have fruit. If your metabolism is healthy, it's not going to cause insulin resistance if you don't have too much all the time.
Would it be undisputed that a dietary modification leading to increased HDL and reduced triglycerides is a positive? Does anyone disagree with that? Does the vegan freak hippie person or the laboratory white coat canola oil employee, anyone, is that something we could base a personal experiment upon?
I would recommend that, but
does anyone think
disagree? There are people
they want to see your triglycerides higher when you go and consult with them, or
there are people who will argue that triglyceride levels don't matter as much as LDL levels, and you should look at your LDL levels.
Oh, okay.
And there are people that will argue that your LDL levels matter more than your HDL levels. Those people, in my mind, are completely ignorant because there's no evidence that supports that. So
for the most part, if we decide, hey, I'm going to try this 4 pillars thing, and I'm going to take my blood and see that my triglycerides are 172 now, and then 30 days later they're 72, and my HDL went from 30 to 60, by and large, just about every, even mainstream physician, whoever you can talk to, is going to say, you did some good stuff.
They're going to give you a thumbs up on the HDL going up, and their knowledge about the harms of triglycerides being, and the ratio aspect is inadequate. So they're not going to understand that a triglyceride going from, say, 140 down to, 90 is a really big deal if at the same time you've upped your HDL. They're generally not aware of the importance of the ratio. They're really focusing on another ratio, which is your total cholesterol to your HDL level. And your total cholesterol is completely irrelevant. And there's a lot of people who say LDL being high is actually better. And I think those people make perfect sense. So I agree with that, but that's really a hard sell in standard medicine. There's cardiologists though that are saying it, that are in, working in institutions and working with other doctors that the other doctors think they're crazy, but their patients are not dying. Their patients are living and getting off medicines and losing weight and becoming healthier.
So that triglycerides to HDL ratio is your favorite, heart disease risk-proof objective.
Yes.
Probably cancer-proof from what we've learned in our lesson today.
Very much possible.
Okay.
Possible.
Go for it, people. And then, write back and say, hey, my triglycerides dropped, my HDL spiked because of this and this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. It's great to know how to be cancer-proof. I love it. Dr. Cate, rocking it in Florida.
Thank you for listening to the show. We would love your feedback at getoveryourselfpodcast@gmail.com. And we would also love if you could leave a rating and a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. I know it's a hassle. You have to go to desktop iTunes, click on the tab that says ratings and reviews, and then click to rate the show anywhere from 5 to 5 stars. And it really helps spread the word so more people can find the show and get over themselves, because they need to. Thanks for doing it. Joovv, Joovv. They are makers of the finest quality red light therapy devices. You've heard of these things? They're pretty awesome. You stand in front of a console of red lights hung on a wall or off a door, and they are emitting specific wavelengths of near-infrared and visible red light that are known to enhance cellular energy production and regeneration. This is not goofy body hack crazy time, because the protocol of red light therapy has been substantiated by many scientific studies and has been used in beauty salons for years to help fight wrinkles. Here's some science about red light therapy. When you expose yourself to the correct wavelengths of red light, it helps your cells produce more ATP energy and also to clear waste products more efficiently by mobilizing nitric oxide trapped in the mitochondria and allowing oxygen to return to the cell and increase ATP production. Yeah, baby, Joovv time! Now, you know I only do ads for stuff I'm really into and I really use, and I've been using a small handheld red light for a few years now, which I place down the front of my pants with the specific goal of testosterone optimization. But Joovv is taking your red light game to the next level with total body red light therapy. So you get these wonderful therapeutic benefits with just a few minutes a day of use. If you do nothing else, please go over and check out their extremely informative website. You'll learn all about red light therapy. They're really committed to education. And if you go to joovv.com/getoveryourself, you get a free gift when you place your order. Joovv.